Hello, this presentation is on a systematised review of disability inclusion in menstrual health efforts during emergencies. In this presentation, I'm going to refer to women and girls, but I do recognise that menstrual health is relevant and important for everyone who menstruates, regardless of gender identity. So in 2020, 1 in 95 people globally were forcibly displaced. Many of those will have included people with disabilities. A recent population-based survey of Syrian refugees living in Istanbul found that 25% of the population have a disability, and 60% of households included at least one person with disabilities. Humanitarian crises such as conflict can cause trauma and injuries, which can result in disabilities. And people with disabilities face inequalities in accessing healthcare services, education, and wash services, and these can be exacerbated during crises. So women and girls with and without disabilities have gender-specific needs, such as menstrual health. And menstrual health is defined as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity in relation to the menstrual cycle. And menstrual health includes having a clean and affordable menstrual material, facilities to change and dispose of the material hygienically and privately, access to soap and water to wash the body and menstrual material used, but it also means having an understanding about what menstruation is and how to manage it hygienically, as well as having access to diagnosis and treatment for menstrual-related disorders. Importantly, it's about a positive environment that's free from menstrual-related stigma and discrimination. Now, many women and girls in low middle-income countries face numerous challenges managing menstruation. In humanitarian crises, menstrual health challenges can be heightened. So for instance, women and girls may flee home without their menstrual materials. So that might be disposable or reusable pads, cloth, underwear. They may live in settlements without safe and private water points, latrines or bathing shelters where they can wash their bodies and change and wash and dispose of their menstrual material. Women and girls with disabilities face inequalities in accessing wash services, and they may also be reliant on caregivers for their menstrual health. But very little evidence exists in the literature about the challenges that women and girls with disabilities face in humanitarian crises in relation to menstruation, and no prior evidence synthesis exists on this topic. So the systematized review is currently under peer review, and it's co-authored by me and my colleagues in World Vision and the International Centre for Evidence in Disability, as well as independent consultants. The review is funded by ELRA's Humanitarian Innovation Fund, and it has two objectives. Firstly, to identify and map the scope of available evidence on the inclusion of disability in menstrual health during emergencies, and secondly, to understand its focus in comparison to menstrual health for people without disabilities in emergencies. So eligible papers covered all regions and emergencies. Peer-reviewed papers were identified by conducting searches in February 2020 and again in August 2021 across 6 online databases. Grey literature was identified through a number of sources, including Google Scholar and Million Short. Eligible papers included data on menstrual health for women and girls with and without disabilities in emergencies. So moving on to the results, I'm going to include a few of them, but not all of them from the paper. But firstly, 51 papers were selected for data extraction. 84% of these were grey literature, so they didn't always explain the methodology or fully quantify the findings. In those 51 included papers, menstrual health and disabilities were discussed with varying degrees of detail. So 25 papers reference menstrual health and disability, but only in passing. And 26 papers reference menstrual health and disability. But only 9 of those 26 papers discussed disability and menstrual health together. In general, people with disabilities were rarely consulted in the preparation of papers or during data collection. And overall, only 16 or 31% of papers potentially consulted people with disabilities on menstrual health issues. Now I'm going to talk about the findings about social support, behavioural expectations, and knowledge of menstruation and its management. So for women and girls without disabilities, their support networks included family, teachers, and health organisations. Poor knowledge of menstruation at menarche was noted, as was the need to train humanitarian staff to talk confidently and in an informed way about menstrual health. In comparison, women and girls with disabilities had reduced social support and smaller networks generally, and these small networks were disrupted during emergencies. Many women and girls with disabilities may be isolated at home, and they may be out of school, and many may be reliant on caregivers for menstrual health, so these caregivers also need support and guidance. Findings related to housing, shelter, and latrines. So for women and girls without disabilities, results noted that overcrowded or cramped living conditions may not offer enough privacy for women and girls to manage menstruation. And this lack of privacy for washing and drying menstrual materials can lead to incomplete drying and consequently potential infection. Communal shelters need private areas for women and girls to manage their menstruation without having to leave their homes at night. And for women and girls with disabilities, issues reported focused on the barriers to using latrines and hand washing facilities, and a need for accessible infrastructure such as ramps, grab rails, and raised toilet seats. Water is needed to wash menstrual materials, the body, and hands, and disposal mechanisms are needed for end-of-use menstrual materials. Findings related to these issues for women and girls without disabilities were reduced water availability, and disposal facilities were often absent. And findings in relation to women and girls with disabilities focused on challenges accessing water points and carrying water, and that they and their caregivers may also face difficulties accessing disposal facilities that do exist. Moving on to the availability of menstrual materials during emergencies. Firstly, for women and girls without disabilities, so the provision of menstrual materials was seen as a low priority, and local preference is not always considered. Hygiene kits provided did not always include enough menstrual materials. For women and girls with disabilities, additional materials were required in hygiene kits, including protective bedding for people who also experience incontinence. And menstrual calendars to track the menstrual cycle were also referenced. And women and girls with disabilities were not always able to access hygiene kits because the distribution centres were not accessible, or because they could not leave the home. So in conclusion, limited rigorous evidence on menstrual health during emergencies exists generally for women and girls with and without disabilities. But within this, there's a dearth of evidence on menstrual health for women and girls with disabilities in emergencies. And what does exist is low quality. And this must be rectified in full collaboration with people who have disabilities. So this is the draft article that these results are taken from. And here are some references that I used in the presentation. Thank you very much.